The 1940s hull net mender sits near the fish dock before the morning has properly opened, and we come quietly to the bench beside her. Settle in now, because there is no hurry here, only the slow return of Twine through finger and thumb. The air is cold enough to make breath show faintly near the warehouse door, and the boards under your boots hold the damp of the humber, the old smell of salt, fish, rope, coal smoke, and wet wool gathered into one soft grey hour. You can hear the town before you see much of it, a low working murmur beyond the panes, where cartwheels and boots pass along the stones, and somewhere a kettle lid trembles on a stove. This is the world of the 1940s hull net mender, not the part of the port that gets painted on posters, and not the part that people tend to remember when they speak of trawlers and brave departures. Her work begins after the shouting has faded, after the catch has been landed, after the vessel's name has gone into someone else's story. We sit with her in the half-light, where torn netting lies in a heap like a dark lace shawl dropped by a tired giant. It's heavier than it looks, especially when it's damp, and when you lift one edge you feel the drag of salt water still hiding in the knots. The fibers rasp lightly against the skin, not sharp enough to cut at first, but rough enough to leave the fingers red by noon. The mender does not complain, because the net has come home wounded, and a net that comes home can be made useful again. She takes the mesh into her lap and searches for the tear with a patient hand, not by sight alone, but by the small wrongness in the pattern. A good net has rhythm, square after square, knot after knot, each opening close enough to its neighbor that your hand learns the shape without asking your eyes. When the rhythm breaks, you feel it. You feel the gap, the slackness, the strand that has parted under strain, and the place where the sea has taken its little payment. Nobody in the street outside would think much of this moment, because repair is quiet, and quiet work often slips out of memory. A trawler leaving Hull could draw a crowd, with gulls overhead and smoke moving from the funnel. But a net mender leaning over torn mesh has only the scrape of her chair, the smell of tarred cord, and the careful passing of a needle through the old line. Yet without this small work, the great work does not happen. The needle is not a sewing needle as you might picture one, but a shuttle, flat and narrow, carrying wound twine in a little belly of its own. You hold it as she does, with a looseness that is really control, letting it pass through the mesh, around the standing cord, under, over, and back again. Her hands remember what the mind no longer has to count. The knot tightens with a tug, and then another opening is measured against the rest. Outside, Hull is waking under a wartime and post-war greyness, with its patched streets, its brick dust in corners, and its people already used to doing without. The 1940s do not arrive here as a picture in sepia, neat and still, but as a morning that smells of coal fires and boiled tea, of damp coats steaming beside doors, of fish boxes, horse leather, engine oil, and old river mud. We move gently through it, not as tourists, but as if you've come in for the day's work, and someone has shown you where to sit. The net mender's bench may be in a loft, a shed, a store, or a corner of a net house where light enters high and pale. It does not matter much, so long as there is room to spread the torn section and enough light to see the pattern. Around you hang ropes, floats, cork lines, spare cord, and tools whose names have been spoken so often that no one bothers to explain them. The place feels practical rather than tidy, with everything shaped by use. There is a cup near her elbow, tea gone brown and strong, with a skin of cooling milk at the edge. There may be bread wrapped in paper, or a slice of something saved from home, because work begins before comfort has had much chance to gather itself. Her coat stays on for the first hour. Your shoulders know why. The cold comes upward from the floor and inward from the river, and even the twine feels chilled until the hands warm it by handling. When she starts, she does not rush toward the middle of the damage because every tear has a border, and the border tells the truth. She finds the sound mesh first, the part still holding its proper square, then works inward from certainty toward confusion. This is how many quiet jobs are done, and perhaps many quiet lives as well. You begin with what still holds, and from there you patiently remake what has given way. The mesh may have been torn by strain against a snag, by rubbing, by rough weather, or by the weight of a catch hauled aboard in a hurry. The mender does not need a grand story. She has the evidence in her lap. There is a broken strand, a stretched knot, a place where fibre has frayed pale and dry, and a loose edge that must be married back into the net before it can return to sea. She measures with her fingers, and you begin to see that measuring is not always done with rulers. The width of a mesh can live between thumb and knuckle. The tightness of a knot can be felt in the wrist. The correct pull has a sound, a small creak and sigh, as twine settles into itself. And when the new piece lies beside the old one, the eye accepts it only after the hand has already approved. In Hull, the work of fishing has always had more people inside it than the names on vessel lists suggest. There are those who sailed, those who sold, those who packed, those who cleaned, those who carried ice, those who kept books, those who mended, and those who waited at kitchen tables when weather turned hard. The net mender belongs to that larger harbour of labour, where every task touches another task, and no one stands entirely alone. Her work is plain, but it is not separate. The nets themselves are not clean things when they arrive. They bring the sea indoors. There is grit in them, fish scale, weed, old damp, and sometimes a trace of diesel smoke from the deck where they were dragged and stacked. When you lift a fold, the smell rises suddenly, like a tide squeezed from cloth. It isn't unpleasant once you've known it for years. It is simply the smell of the job, and the job has no need to sweeten itself. By now your eyes have adjusted to the dimness, and you notice the light catching on wet knots, each one briefly silver before it darkens again. A gull calls somewhere outside, not close enough to startle, just present enough to remind you that the river is nearby. Boots pass the door, voices murmur, and the Hull morning goes on around the net mender with the steady indifference of a place that has much to do. We stay where the work is quiet. Her fingers may be taped in places or hardened where the cord runs over them. Small injuries are part of the trade, though not spoken of dramatically. A nick near the nail, a rough patch at the thumb, a soreness across the palm after a long day of pulling knots tight. These things become part of how the body knows its own labor. When she flexes her hand, there is a little stiffness, then the work takes over again. The mending twine must match as well as it can, not in color perhaps, because old nets darken and weather unevenly, but in strength and thickness. A piece too fine may fail, while a piece too heavy can spoil the lie of the mesh. You learn that repair is not only filling a hole, it is restoring balance. The new part must join the old part without boasting, without drawing attention, without making the net awkward when it moves through water. And this may be part of why nobody remembers the 1940s Hull net mender, because her best work is meant to disappear. A badly mended place announces itself. A good mend returns the pattern to such calm that no one sees the wound at all. The trawler goes out, the gear is set, the catch is hauled, and if the net holds, the mender's success is hidden inside that holding. The morning lengthens, and the first cold edge begins to leave the room as the stove settles into its dull heat. You might hear a coal shovel scrape, then the soft crumble as fuel drops into place, and for a little while the air has that mineral warmth peculiar to workshops in winter. The mender shifts the net across her knees. The repaired part falls away with a heavier sound than cloth, a wet slither over wood, and another torn section comes forward. This second tear is longer, and it asks for more patience. She studies it with no outward ceremony, only a stillness that means she is counting, planning, and remembering the way the pattern should run. If you sit beside her, you learn not to interrupt too soon. There are silences in work that are not empty. They are full of shape, number, and attention. The shuttle moves again, and the twine pays out in measured lengths. Under, around, through, tighten, and then the next. The rhythm settles into the room, and after a while you may stop following each motion and simply feel the pulse of it, like someone breathing beside you in sleep. The work is not fast, but neither is it slow in the way of idleness. It is slow because accuracy has a pace of its own. Some net menders worked in groups, and when there were others nearby, the room could have its own weather of quiet talk. News would pass softly from bench to bench. A child's cough, a neighbour's errand, the price of something scarce, a letter received, a coat needing repair, a tram missed in rain. These were not grand conversations, but they made a kind of net too, knotting one person's day to another's. In the 1940s, Hull carried visible damage and invisible routines side by side. Bombing had left gaps, repairs had left scars, and people had learned to step around absence without naming it every minute. Yet the docks still required hands. The fish still had to be landed, the boxes shifted, the gear repaired, and the kettle boiled when someone had enough coal and enough time. The net mender's work sits inside that everyday endurance, as quiet as breath on a cold pane. You notice how she keeps the torn edges from tangling, folding one part over another, weighing a corner with a tool, or pinning a section under her boot. A net has a will when it is damp. It clings to itself, twists, catches, and pretends to be more confused than it is. The mender has patience for this. She lifts, shakes, smooths, and waits for the pattern to show itself again. There is a kindness in this sort of handling, though no one would call it that aloud. The net is not a delicate object, not lace for a parlor window, but it still needs careful treatment if it is to be strong. Pull too hard in the wrong place, and you make a new problem. Pull too little, and the repair hangs slack. So you learn the middle pressure, the steady hand, the amount of force that restores without punishing. By mid-morning, the light at the window has strengthened, though the sky beyond it remains pale and low. The Humber light has its own softness, especially when cloud holds it close to the water and spreads it over brick, timber, rope, and slate. In that light, the net mender's hands look older than her face, because hands keep a more honest record. They remember winter better than cheeks do. They remember every knot. A younger person might be learning beside her, watching first, then trying a small repair under instruction. The older mender does not give a speech. She says, "Not like that," or "pull it even," or "count again from the sound mesh." Her teaching is practical, as many working teachings are, and its tenderness is hidden under correction. You know you are being trusted when someone lets you ruin a little twine and then shows you how not to do it twice. There is a soft satisfaction when the learner makes a knot that sits properly. It isn't celebrated loudly. The older mender may only glance, nod, and return to her own work. But the nod warms the day more than a stove for a moment. You feel it if you are there. The net accepts the new knot, the pattern continues, and the small knowledge has passed from one set of fingers to another. The tools on the bench are few, which makes each one familiar. The shuttle, the knife, perhaps a gauge for mesh size, a ball or hank of twine, a hook, and the rough surface of the bench itself, scarred by years of cutting and pulling. The knife is kept sharp enough to finish a strand cleanly. A rag lies nearby for wiping hands, though hands do not stay clean long in this work. Cleanliness has to wait. If the net is made from natural fiber, it behaves like something that has lived with weather. Hemp, cotton, manila, and other older materials could swell, shrink, rot, stiffen, or soften depending on their treatment and the sea's mood. You do not need a laboratory to know this. You know it when a strand feels tired before it breaks. You know it when a knot has lost its bite, and when a wet line smells sour instead of simply salty. The mender's judgment is part craft and part memory. She remembers which vessels are hard on their gear, which crews bring back nets in a state, which skippers want a thing done quickly, and which repairs will only last if a larger section is replaced. No one writes all of this down. Much of a port lives in memory held by working people, and when those people are gone, whole maps of knowledge fade with them. That is another reason the net mender is easily forgotten. The archive keeps names of ships more readily than the warmth of a hand around twine. It keeps tonnage, dates, landings, owners, losses, and official notices, but the smell of damp mesh on a freezing morning is harder to file. We can still come close, though, if we sit patiently with the ordinary facts, and let the ordinary facts become human again. And as the morning wears on, the hull net mender moves from finding damage to restoring shape, and we move with her into the deeper rhythm of the day. The room is warmer now, but not warm enough to soften everything. Your coat may be open at the throat, your fingers may have stopped aching, and the tea in the cup has been replaced once, dark and hot, with steam curling past the tired rim. The repaired section must be checked, because the eye can forgive what the sea will not. She spreads the mesh wider and lifts it toward the light, letting each square show its line. A wrong mesh is visible now. One opening too narrow, another too slack, a knot leaning where it should sit straight. She makes small corrections without irritation. Work like this teaches you that mistakes are often just another path through the task. There is a faint music in the checking, though it is made of ordinary sounds. Twine slips over twine. A wooden shuttle taps the bench. Someone coughs into a sleeve. A cart outside jolts over a stone, and from farther off comes the muted note of industry. A winch, a whistle, a door sliding open, the whole port shifting its weight as the day grows busier. You listen without needing to follow every sound. Hull's fish dock in the 1940s was not a place of romance to those who worked it. It was cold, wet, loud, practical, and full of smells that clung to clothing long after the day ended. Yet there was order inside it, because work repeated itself until repetition became a kind of knowledge. The net mender's corner shared in that order. Torn gear came in, sound gear went out. Between those two facts lay hours of quiet skill. You can imagine her lunch, if the day allows such a word, for something eaten quickly between jobs. Bread, dripping perhaps, or cheese if there is some, a flask or cup of tea, an apple wrapped in paper, something plain enough to be held with one hand, while the other brushes fibers from the skirt or coat. The bench does not become a dining table, not really. It simply agrees to serve for a few minutes, as workspaces often do. There may be laughter then, low and brief, over some small remark that would mean nothing outside the room. Humor in such places does not need to be sharp. It can be as gentle as noticing that a kettle sings better than the wireless, or that one particular knot has more pride than sense. We smile with them softly, then let the smile settle, because the work is waiting and the net is still spread across the boards. The mender returns to the torn edge and begins again, and you may feel the calm that comes when a task is known. Not easy exactly, because the hands ache and the eyes tire, but known in the way a familiar road is known at dusk. You do not need to see the whole distance. You only need the next step, the next knot, the next piece of mesh restored to its place among all the others. Each knot has a purpose, yet none demands attention for itself once finished. That is the humility of the net. It is made of many small holdings, and its strength depends on their agreement. A single knot may seem almost nothing, but the absence of one can open into a tear, and the tear can widen until the catch escapes and the day's labor changes shape. So the mender gives the small thing its due. In the middle hours, the body settles into its working posture. Shoulders round slightly, the head inclines, feet find the same place on the floor. If you were watching from the doorway, you might mistake stillness for ease, but close beside her you understand the quiet effort. The back holds, the fingers pull, the eyes travel the pattern again and again. The whole person becomes part of the repair. Light shifts across the room, revealing dust in the air and dark, damp patches on the floorboards. A strand of loose fiber clings to her cuff. Somewhere nearby, someone drags a crate, and the sound comes through the wall as a wooden groan. The mender pauses, not because of the sound, but because she has reached a junction where old twine and new twine must meet cleanly. She trims the loose end, folds it into the work, and tightens the knot with a practiced pull. You may begin to see why this labor, though plain, contains a kind of quiet intelligence. It asks for pattern recognition, touch, memory, and judgment, all held in the body, while conversation and weather move around it. It asks for patience without fuss, and accuracy without display. The best menders would not have described themselves grandly. They would have said they were getting on with it, which is sometimes the deepest description work can have. In the 1940s Hull household, the boundary between paid work and homework could be thin, especially for women whose days were already full before wages entered the question. A net mender might leave the dock and still have cooking, washing, mending of another kind, shopping in short supply, children to settle, or an elderly relative to check on. The hands that repaired a trawler's gear might later darn a stocking by lamplight. The scale changed, but the patience did not. We should not make the work prettier than it was. It could be monotonous, cold, underpraised, and hard on the body. The pay might not match the skill, and the recognition certainly did not. But warmth, does not require pretending. We can honor the job more honestly by noticing both its weariness and its grace, the ache in the wrist and the beauty of a broken pattern made whole again. The mender knows that the net will not remain whole forever. That is not failure. It is the nature of gear that works. Nets are made to meet resistance, to move through water, to gather weight, to rub against deck and rail and seabed, and then to return with signs of that meeting written into every strand. Her repair is not a final ending. It is a continuation, a way of sending the net back into its proper life. That thought can be restful, if you let it be. Nothing here has to be perfect forever. The work is to mend what can be mended today, with the tools available, in the light that has been given. Tomorrow may bring another tear, another cold room, another length of twine wound onto the shuttle, and still the hands will know where to begin. There is comfort in such modest certainty. As afternoon settles over the hull docks, the task changes again, and we follow the net from the mender's lap into the larger web of the harbour. The repaired mesh is gathered, lifted, and laid aside with care, not tossed like waste or laundry, because the way a net is handled now will matter later. It must not be twisted into confusion. It must be ready for men in boots and oilskins, for deckboards slick with spray, for the pull of winch and tide. The room may dim before the day is truly over. Winter afternoons in the north can fold in early, and even in better months, the weather over the Humber can turn light into pewter. Someone lights a lamp or shifts closer to the window, and the flame or bulb gives the twine a yellow cast. The smell of warm dust rises from the shade. The mender blinks, rubs her eyes, and continues with the kind of steadiness that does not ask to be admired. A repaired net has to be bundled in a way that makes sense to those who will take it next. This is another skill that hides inside the task. You do not simply finish and walk away. You gather the weight, keep the edges known, prevent fresh tangles, and make sure the weak places have not been hidden where they cannot be checked. Your hands move broadly now after the fine work, pulling folds of mesh across the bench, feeling its heaviness settle. There is satisfaction in that heaviness when the repair is done. The same heap that looked wounded in the morning now has form again. It lies with its pattern restored, and though it is stained and damp and old in places, it is ready. The mender may not say this aloud, but you can feel the small inward easing. A job has passed through her hands and come out useful. That is no small thing. Outside, the port keeps its own account of usefulness. Men call to one another over distance. A bicycle bell sounds thinly through the damp air. A lorry coughs, idles, and moves on. Fish boxes are stacked and shifted, ropes coiled, doors shut, ledgers marked, and somewhere a ship's funnel sends a darker thread into the sky. Hull is made of many such threads, and the net mender's thread runs quietly among them. If you follow the repaired net onward, you come closer to the trawler, though we keep our pace soft and do not turn the day into drama. The vessel is practical and worn, with paint scuffed, rails marked, and deck gear smelling of oil, salt, and old labour. The repaired mesh may be stowed with other gear, waiting for its next voyage. No ceremony attends it. A net returns to service the way many workers do, without trumpets, because being ready is the point. The men who handle it may notice the mend only in passing. A good repair does not invite comment. It simply lets the work continue. Perhaps one man sees the new twine and says it'll hold, or perhaps he says nothing at all, which may be praise enough in a world where speech is often saved for what has gone wrong. The mender's labour travels with them whether her name does or not. This is how certain jobs vanish from public memory. They are essential at the moment of need, then absorbed into the success of something larger. The net mender disappears into the trawler's departure, the landing of fish, the meal on a plate, the wage brought home, the port's reputation, the photograph of a vessel against a grey sky. Repair becomes background, and background is where many skilled hands spend their lives. Yet, we can stay with the background a while longer. We can notice the wool of her sleeve darkened where damp mesh rested. We can notice the faint groove in the skin where twine ran across a finger. We can notice the cup ring on the bench, the little pile of trimmed ends, the knife set down safely, and the way she checks the floor before leaving, because a fallen tool is an annoyance tomorrow. These are the marks of a real day. The question of why nobody remembers the 1940s Hull net mender does not have one answer. It has many small ones, and they lie together like mesh. The work was often done by people whose names were not written large. It took place indoors or at the edge of more visible labor. It aimed to erase its own evidence. It belonged to routine, and routine rarely makes a monument, though it carries more of life than monuments do. There is also the matter of gender, though we speak it gently because the work itself is our focus and not a lecture. Many forms of repair, sorting, cleaning, stitching, and preparing have been treated as extensions of ordinary care, even when they required trained hands and long experience. When a task resembles something done in the home, the world may fail to see the wage-earning craft inside it. The net mender knew better. Her fingers knew exactly what skill cost. You can feel that cost when the day nears its end. The room has warmed and cooled by turns. The light has moved. The same patch of bench has held torn fibre, crumbs, a cup, a knife, and a forearm resting for just a moment longer than planned. The mender's shoulders may ache now. Her eyes may blur at the edges of the mesh, and she may hold the next section closer, then farther, seeking the distance at which the pattern behaves. Still, there is no grand ending to the shift. Workplaces like this often end by degrees. One task is finished, then another is made ready for morning. Tools return to their places, not because anyone is sentimental about order, but because tomorrow's cold start will be hard enough without searching. The shuttle is set down. The twine is covered or tucked away. The repaired net rests in its proper heap, and as the last usable light leaves the high windows, we remain beside the hull net mender while the day loosens its hold on the room. The harbour outside has not gone silent, because harbours rarely do, but its sounds seem farther apart now, with more air between the footsteps, the voices, and the low mechanical rumble. The smell of salt remains. So does the smell of twine, damp wool, tea, coal smoke, and wood rubbed smooth by many working sleeves. She may step outside into a street where the evening has gathered blue and grey around the buildings. The cold finds her quickly after the close air of the workroom. You feel it at the throat and wrists, those small openings where weather enters first. Somewhere a window glows, somewhere supper is being stretched, somewhere another person is coming off another shift, carrying the day in the bend of the back and the set of the mouth. The net mender walks home through a hull that is still piecing itself together, like a city with its own torn mesh. Streets have memories in them, and some are visible in brick, bordered gaps, uneven repairs, and the sudden openness where a building used to stand. Yet daily life moves through these spaces with quiet insistence. A woman carries a parcel, a child drags a stick along railings, a man pauses under a lamp to relight a cigarette, cupped from the wind. We do not need to follow too closely. It is enough to understand that the work does not entirely leave her when she leaves the bench. The hands may continue their small motions in memory, thumb and finger repeating the knot without twine. The smell of the net may cling to the cuffs. The body may still feel the weight of damp mesh in the lap, as if the day has folded itself there and only slowly lifts away. At home the light is softer, though perhaps not warmer. A kitchen chair creaks. A kettle is set on. The ordinary domestic sounds gather around her, spoon against cup, a drawer sliding, water poured, someone asking a small question from another room. These sounds are not separate from the dock. They are the other half of the same life, the place where wages become food, where tired hands wash, where silence is sometimes the kindest welcome. Maybe no one asks about the net. Maybe they ask only if the day was cold, or whether there was any tea left, or whether a neighbor had passed on a message. This is how work can be both central and nearly invisible. It supports the day, but the day does not always stop to name it. The mender may answer briefly, because she has already spoken enough through her hands. Night comes down over the humber, and the repaired nets wait elsewhere in darkness. They do not sleep, but they rest, if objects can be said to rest when their purpose has paused. The knots tightened today hold quietly among older knots, new twine beside old, pale repair beside darkened fibre, each part ready to take strain when called upon. There is peace in imagining them there, gathered and still, carrying the shape her hands restored. You may find your breathing slowing as we think of that pattern. Mesh after mesh, knot after knot, each one neither hurried nor alone. The net is a lesson in connection without noise. It holds because many small points hold together, and perhaps the mender's day, the port's day, and our own quiet listening are not so different from that. We rest in the thought without forcing it to become more than it is. The reason she is not widely remembered may be the very reason she matters here. She belonged to the working underside of things, to the patient making ready, to the repair before departure and the restoration after return. She was part of the harbor's breathing, and breath is rarely noticed until it falters. Tonight we notice it gently, not to turn her into a statue, but to let her ordinary skill have room in the dark. The workroom is empty now, or nearly empty, with a bench cooling in the lamplight and a few cut ends of twine left like pale hairs against the wood. The floorboards hold the day's damp. The tools are where they belong. Outside, the tide moves with its own old patience, and somewhere beyond the dock walls a trawler waits for morning, carrying a net that has been mended well enough to disappear. By the next morning, the same net may be carried back toward a deck slick with frost, and we follow it only as far as the working light allows. The hull net mender is not there to watch it go, but the measure of her hands is hidden in the mesh, held quietly where the repair joins the older cord. You can imagine the net being lifted by men who think mostly of weather, tide, fuel, and departure, while the mended place bends with the rest, neither proud nor weak, just part of the whole. The Quay has its own morning chill, sharper than the room where she worked, because the river wind has room to move between buildings and overstacked gear. It gets into sleeves and under collars, bringing the smell of salt, coal smoke, wet rope, fish scales, and cold metal from the rails. You stand a little aside with us, feeling the boards tremble under movement, while boots thud past and voices carry in low fragments through the grey. The port is awake before the sun has much strength, and its waking is not bright, but steady. A net going aboard is not treated like a treasure, even when it is valuable, because working things are handled with the practical roughness of people who trust them. It is hauled, folded, shifted and stowed, with the repaired mesh moving among older patches, knots from other months, and stains from other voyages. If you looked closely, you might find the place where yesterday's hands entered the story, but no one pauses long enough for that. The day is already leaning forward. This is one of the quiet truths of the 1940s hull net mender, that her labor often traveled away from her without a signature. A carpenter might leave a shaped edge, a smith might leave a visible hinge, and a painter might leave color on a wall, but she left continuity. Her work was strongest when it became difficult to find. The net returned to being a net, and that was the point. Out beyond the dock, the repaired mesh would meet cold water again, and every knot would be tested in a way no workroom could imitate. The sea does not care who tied what. It gives weight, drag, strain, and motion, and it asks the whole thing to hold together while the vessel pitches and the crew work by habit. Yet the mender has already answered in the only language the net understands, through proper gauge, firm knots, and twine drawn tight enough to belong. Back on land, she may be starting another day with another torn section, because work does not wait for the return of gratitude. There is always more mesh. There is always some edge frayed by use, some place where old fiber has thinned, some knot that needs cutting out and remaking before the weakness travels. When you sit beside her again, the morning feels familiar, but not identical, because every tear has its own shape, and every day brings its own weather into the room. The work begins with sorting, and sorting is slower than it sounds. You lift a fold, find where it belongs, shake it free, and let the net open itself as much as it will. It does not always cooperate. Damp mesh catches on cuffs, on splinters, on its own knots, and sometimes it seems to tighten in irritation when handled by someone impatient. The hull net mender has learned not to fight it at once, but to loosen one place, then another, until the hidden order begins to show. There is a sound to this loosening, a low whisper and slap, as cord slides over cord and drops against the floorboards. It is not music exactly, but after a while your ear accepts it as the room's pulse. A knife clicks against the bench, A shuttle rolls slightly and is caught, and someone's chair shifts with a soft wooden complaint. The air carries dampness, tea steam, and the faint sour trace of old seawater drying too slowly. If the tear is ragged, she may trim back to sound material before rebuilding the mesh. And that can feel almost severe to someone watching for the first time. Why cut more from something already broken? But you learn that weak edges make weak repairs, and a tidy mend begins where the old strength still lives. She finds that place with finger and eye, then removes what cannot be trusted, not angrily, but with the calm economy of experience. There is a lesson in that too, though she would not stop to shape it into a saying. In a net, as in many quiet repairs, you do not pretend a frayed strand is sound, because you wish to save it. You cut back gently to what will hold, and from there you rebuild the pattern one honest knot at a time. The finished work may be smaller in its beginning, but it is stronger in its return. The mesh gauge helps keep the openings even, though many menders carry the gauge inside their fingers as much as in any tool. A wooden gauge is simple, smooth from use, and shaped to the correct width, but the hand still judges the final lie. You pass the shuttle around, draw the twine, set the knot against the gauge, and let the new mesh match the old one as closely as age and wear allow. Too tight, and the net puckers. Too loose, and it sags like a tired pocket. You begin to understand that the job is less about speed than agreement. New twine must agree with old twine. Fresh knots must agree with weathered knots. The mended section must agree with the movement of the whole net when it is hauled, soaked, strained, and spread again. Every small act in the room anticipates a larger motion elsewhere. Out on water we can hear only faintly in imagination. During the 1940s, some materials were scarce, reused, saved, or treated with special care, and the habit of making do had become part of ordinary thinking. Nothing useful was discarded without consideration. Offcuts might be kept if they could serve later, tools repaired, twine guarded from damp where possible, and worn things given one more season if the hands could persuade them. The hull net mender worked inside that careful world, where thrift was not an idea but a daily pressure. You can see it in the bench area, where nothing looks decorative and almost everything has earned its place. The old tin holding small pieces of twine has scratches along its rim. The rag has been washed many times and is still not clean. The stool has one leg made steady by a wedge of folded wood, and the window ledge carries dust, salt bloom, and perhaps a forgotten matchbox. The room does not announce poverty or pride. It simply shows use. A mender might know the feel of different batches of twine, the way one runs smoothly and another kinks, the way some strands drink damp and others resist it. She might test a length by pulling it between both hands, listening for strain, feeling for weakness with a thumb that pauses over every irregularity. To someone passing by, it could look like fussing. To you, sitting with her, it becomes a quiet conversation between material and hand. The younger mender, if one is still learning in the room, watches how the shuttle is loaded. Twine must be wound so it pays out freely, not too loose and not so tight that it snarls when the hand needs rhythm. The loading itself is restful to watch. A wrapping and turning, a neat accumulation of line around the narrow tool. You feel the preparation before the repair, the way the day gathers itself before it can move. When the shuttle is full, it has a pleasing weight, light enough for hours of motion, but solid enough to sit properly in the hand. The wood may be darkened by oil from skin and years of use. Its edges are smooth where fingers have held it, and if you turned it over you might find a nick from a dropped tool or a scrape from a bench nail. It is not precious, it is intimate. As the morning settles deeper into its pattern, we stay close to the hull net mender's pace, because this is where the forgotten job reveals itself. Not in a single remarkable moment, and not in a story anyone would gather a crowd to hear, but in the 1,000 adjustments that prevent trouble later. She notices the twist before it becomes a knot. She sees the stretched mesh before it tears. She feels the old strand preparing to fail, and quietly replaces it before the sea has a chance. There may be a radio somewhere, though not always, and if it is on, the sound is likely thin, wavering, and half buried under work. A song may pass through the room without anyone giving it full attention. News may come and go, voices from elsewhere speaking of public matters, while private hands continue their patient tasks. The contrast is gentle but real, because history is often loud in the distance and quiet where people are actually earning their bread. The Mender's Day is not outside history. It is held within it. Hull knew the strain of war, the damage of bombing, the hardship of supplies, and the long effort of getting ordinary systems to function again. Yet in the net house or workroom, the immediate question might still be whether this tear could be repaired by noon. Great events pressed on small tasks, but small tasks pressed back by continuing. That is one way a city survives. You may smell dinner cooking somewhere far beyond the dock before midday has properly arrived. A faint domestic note carried through open doors and mingled with rope and river. It is hard to tell what it is. Perhaps onions, perhaps broth, perhaps only hot fat in a pan. The smell comes and goes, and for a moment, the workshop feels connected to kitchens across the city, all those separate rooms making warmth where they can. Then the net pulls attention back. The mender works a section that has been damaged along a seam, and here the repair asks for more careful matching. Seams in netting are places where structure gathers, and when they fail, the surrounding mesh can distort in several directions at once. She follows the line with a fingertip, counts the openings, and decides where to begin. You can almost see the calculation passing through her hands rather than her face. She may talk while doing this, but not all talk is distraction. Experienced hands can carry one rhythm while the mind carries another. A story about someone's cousin, a remark about the price of coal, a memory of a hard winter, or a small complaint about boots that never dry may move through the room while the shuttle keeps its path. The work is steady enough to hold conversation, but demanding enough to shape it into pauses. When she reaches a difficult place, the talk fades. No one announces this. The room simply knows. You feel the attention narrow, the way it does when a needle must find the correct hole in poor light, or when a knot must be made where there is barely enough old line to catch. The mender leans in slightly. The shuttle passes, the new twine is drawn through, and the knot sits, perhaps not easily, but well enough to continue. Well enough is not a careless phrase here. It means fit for purpose, honest, and suited to the life the object must return to. A net does not need the perfection of a display case. It needs strength, flexibility, correct measure, and the absence of hidden weakness. The mender understands that usefulness has its own beauty, quieter than polish, and often more durable. By midday, the Hull net mender's hands have darkened with work, and the day has acquired that middle weight where morning freshness is gone but evening is still distant. The stove may need tending. The floor is scattered with tiny fibers and trimmed ends. Sunlight, if there is any, touches the room only briefly before cloud takes it back, leaving the high window pale again. You breathe with the place, and the place breathes slowly around you. Lunch, when it comes, is not a chapter break in the way an outsider might imagine. It is a pause folded into labor. She clears just enough space, wipes her fingers as well as she can, and eats something plain while looking at the net, as if it might explain the afternoon before she returns to it. The body rests, but the eye keeps working. You may know that feeling too, when a task stays present, even while the hands are still. There is warmth in the ordinary sharing of food, even if there is little to share. Someone may offer a bit of sugar, a heel of bread, a refill from a kettle, or simply the comfort of sitting without needing to speak. The room softens during such pauses. Tools lie quiet. Steam rises. Outside, the port continues in its heavy way, but inside the bench area there is a brief pocket of human ease, no larger than a cup held in both hands. Then the pause ends without ceremony. Paper is folded, crumbs are brushed aside. The stool scrapes. The net returns to the lap, and the first pull of the twine after eating seems to draw the whole afternoon back into motion. You can hear the shift, even if nothing dramatic has happened. Work has resumed, and the room has accepted it. The afternoon repair may be on a trawl net, large and coarse compared with the fine household sewing people might associate with mending. Its scale changes the body's movement. The arms open wider, the shoulder joins the wrist. The mender may stand for a while, pulling a broad section into place, then sit again to finish the detail. You feel the weight through her motions, because the net is not a piece of fabric, but gear made to meet the sea. The word gear is useful here, plain and practical. It includes the net, lines, floats, weights, and all the working parts that make fishing possible, each one needing attention before failure turns expensive. The hull net mender's corner of that world was one of maintenance, and maintenance is one of the least celebrated forms of knowledge. It prevents stories people would rather not have. It saves time no one counts. It holds together days that later look simple only because someone did the holding. You can notice how often her eyes move ahead of her hands. She is not only tying the current knot, but reading the next few meshes, anticipating where the pattern will close, and making sure the repair will not drift out of square. If she waits too long to notice a mistake, she may have to undo 10 minutes of work, so she checks gently, repeatedly, without making checking feel separate from doing. Undoing is part of the job too, and perhaps one of its quieter disciplines. A knot tied wrong must be loosened or cut, and the time spent making it cannot be recovered by impatience. She may sigh, but she does not rage. The knife comes up, the bad place is removed, and the work begins again from the last honest point. In that motion there is a calm acceptance many trades teach sooner or later. You and I, sitting near the bench in the listening dark, can take from this only what feels useful. The mender is not trying to instruct us. She is earning her wage, doing what the day requires, and probably thinking more about the next cup of tea than any grand meaning. Still, quiet work gives off quiet meanings the way coal gives off heat, and if we are close enough, we may feel them without needing to name them too firmly. The net grows sounder across the afternoon, not all at once, not visibly from a distance, but section by section, the raggedness decreases, and the old rhythm returns. The repaired areas do not match perfectly in color, because age, weather, tar, salt, and use have marked each part differently. Yet the pattern begins to hold. That is enough. In working life, enough can be a beautiful word. Outside, the late day brings a change in the traffic of the dock. Some voices grow tired, and some grow brisk because the hour is running away. Doors close harder in the wind. A gull lands somewhere on a roof edge and complains to no one in particular. The smell of fish may strengthen as another load passes nearby, cold and metallic, with that unmistakable edge that belongs to the market and the sea together. Inside, the mender may stretch her fingers one by one, pressing the tips into her palm, then return to the line. Small movements of relief are easy to miss. A roll of the shoulders, a shift of the feet, a brief straightening of the back while her eyes remain on the mesh. Bodies at repetitive work learn their own little mercies, and you begin to notice them when you have spent enough time in the room. The old benches and stools are part of the story as well. They carry the marks of many workers, not only one. A dark place where hands often rested, a cut made by a blade that slipped years before, a smooth edge where fabric, rope, or skin wore the wood down slowly. Such things are not records in the official sense, but they are records all the same. They say, here, someone sat and worked, and then someone else did too. In this way, the hull net mender belonged to a chain that extended backward and forward. Older hands had taught her, perhaps directly, perhaps simply by being watched from childhood. Younger hands may have learned from her, even if later changes in materials and industry altered the craft. The job did not stay fixed forever. Few jobs do. But for this particular hour in the 1940s, the work has the shape we are tracing now. Synthetic fibers would change net making and mending in later years, just as engines, markets, regulations, and the fishing industry itself would change the life of the port. But we remain with her, before those later changes fully carry us away, when natural fiber and hand repair still hold a central place in the daily cycle. The room has its own time. The shuttle moves, the knot tightens, and the mender's attention returns us from the future to the bench. It is tempting to say that forgotten work was simpler, but that would not be true. It was often complicated in ways that did not require formal language. The complication lived in touch, timing, weather sense, social knowledge, thrift, and stamina. The net mender did not need to call her practice technical for it to be technical. The sea would judge the work more strictly than any certificate. As the afternoon light thins, we see the repaired net gathered once more, and the hull net mender checks it with a tired but careful gaze. She runs her hands along the border of the repair, feeling for a missed loose end, a knot that might catch, or a mesh that has fallen out of line. Her palms move slowly now. The day has entered them, yet the checking remains exact, because the last minutes of a job matter as much as the first. There is a kind of tenderness in preparing a thing to leave your hands. Not sentimental tenderness, perhaps, but practical care. You want it not to shame you. You want it to serve. You want the person who next lifts it to find no careless trouble hidden in the folds. The mender gathers the net with that feeling, even if she would laugh at us for saying it so finely. The day's trimmed ends may be swept away, though some cling stubbornly to cracks in the floor. The tools are put back, and each return has its own small sound, wood against wood, metal against tin, twine settling into a bag or drawer. A kettle is emptied. A chair is pushed in. Someone pulls on gloves, another wraps a scarf tighter, and the room begins changing from workspace to closed space. You can feel the difference before the door opens. When the door does open, the air outside is colder, and the port's evening smell enters at once. River damp, smoke, old fish, wet stone, and something metallic from rails or chains. The mender steps into it with the day behind her, and the next day already waiting somewhere ahead. We follow only gently, not crowding her, because a person leaving work deserves the privacy of her own thoughts, especially when those thoughts may be no more than a list of errands and the hope of warmth. The streets of Hull in that hour hold many endings at once. Shop doors close, bicycles rattle over uneven ground, women carry bags close to the body against the cold. A bus passes with misted windows, faces pale behind the glass, each one carrying a different version of tiredness homeward. You hear the city not as noise, but as a woven thing, every sound crossing another until none stands alone. The net mender's hands may ache more once they stop moving. That is often how work behaves. While the rhythm continues, the body obeys, but after the tools are set down, soreness rises like damp through stone. She may flex her fingers inside her gloves, feeling the pull across knuckles and the tender places where twine rubbed all day. Tomorrow those fingers will return to the same motions, because that is what work asks. At home, perhaps she washes in warm water, if there is enough, watching grey loosen from the skin and circle the basin. The smell of the dock does not vanish entirely. It softens but stays in wool, hair, and the seams of a coat. You can imagine her rubbing at a stubborn mark near the thumb, then giving up because the evening has other demands. Some traces of the working day are simply carried forward. A meal is made or shared, and the domestic light gathers around the table. It may be a modest light, not bright enough to banish every corner, but enough to make faces visible and steam rise from plates or cups. There is comfort in that. The body that sat in the damp workroom now sits in another kind of room, where chairs are known by their creaks, and a clock measures evening more kindly than the dock measured labor. Still, the work may enter conversation by small routes. Someone asks whether the nets were bad today. She answers, "One was." Someone says the wind has turned. She says it'll make the morning raw. These are not stories designed to last, but they hold real knowledge. And if a child is listening half-heartedly from the other side of the table, perhaps some of that knowledge settles without being named. Many trades are inherited first as atmosphere. Later, when the house quiets, her hands may find another mending task, smaller and finer, because ordinary life has its own torn places. A sock, a cuff, a seam, a child's garment, a cloth kept longer than fashion would approve. The needle is different, the scale is different, the stakes are different, yet the patience has a familiar taste. Repair follows her home, not as punishment only, but as a way of keeping life usable. We should let that evening remain plain. No grand speech, no sudden memory polished into drama. Just the scrape of a chair, the banked fire, the smell of soap and supper, the heaviness of eyelids, the faint soreness in the wrists, and the knowledge that somewhere near the dock a net she mended lies ready in the dark. It is enough to rest there for a while, and when night deepens over Hull, the harbour becomes a quieter version of itself, though never fully still. Water touches stone, chains shift softly, A late footstep crosses an open place and fades. Lamps make small amber pools on wet ground, and the wind moves through ropes and corners with a low, patient voice. You can stand with us at a distance and feel the whole working city settling. Not asleep exactly, but lowered into darkness. The net house or workroom is shut. Its benches wait without complaint. The shuttle lies where it was placed, holding perhaps a little twine for tomorrow. The floorboards cool. The smell of damp fibre remains in the air, folded into wood and plaster, ready to rise again when the door opens and bodies bring warmth back into the room. Places of work remember through repetition, and this room has remembered many hands. Nobody walking past in the dark would think to honor it. They would see only a practical building, perhaps not even that, just a shadow near other shadows. Yet inside, day after day, torn things were made serviceable, and serviceable things kept an industry moving. The quietness of that fact is not a weakness. It is the very reason we can listen to it now without being startled, letting it settle like fine dust in the mind. The 1940s Hull net mender, whose name we may not know, rests somewhere beyond our sight, and the repaired knots hold their silence elsewhere. We do not need to possess her story completely. It may be kinder to admit the edges we cannot fill. But we can sit near the work she did, near the smell of tarred twine and cold tea, near the steady motion of shuttle and hand, and allow the forgotten corner to become visible for one long, quiet night. Morning will come again, as it always does in work like this. The window will pale, the kettle will mutter, boots will bring damp into the room, and a new heap of netting will be dropped with a weighty sigh against the boards. Someone will say it's a rough one, this tear, or perhaps say nothing because the tear speaks clearly enough. The mender will take her place and begin from what still holds. You can feel the first cold of that imagined morning before it arrives. It touches the fingertips, the nose, the back of the neck, and the little hollow where a collar has shifted. The bench is not yet friendly. The shuttle is cold in the hand. The net smells stronger when first unfolded, as though the sea has spent the night breathing into it. Still, the work begins, and beginning warms the body more faithfully than waiting. The torn place is found, the border traced, and the sound mesh counted. Old twine is tested, new twine is chosen. The shuttle passes through, and the knot is drawn into the line of its neighbours. There is no hurry. There is only the measured repair of one opening, then another, until the broken edge becomes less broken, and the day, which began as damp and grey, becomes a pattern you can follow. In that pattern, the reason for remembering changes. We are not remembering because the world once forgot to build a monument. We are remembering because the ordinary work itself deserves a little room, and because a human hand restoring usefulness is one of the gentlest images history can offer. The Hull net mender does not need to be turned into legend. She only needs to be seen at her bench, doing the work well. So we remain there, not forcing the pace, while the shuttle moves again through the mesh. The twine slides with a faint rasp. The knot tightens with a small, satisfying pull. The room smells of river, wool, wood, tea, and old smoke, and beyond the door the port carries on with its broad, weathered breathing. You are safe to let the details blur now, because the rhythm will keep going without needing to be held. Another knot is made, and another after that, each one joining the quiet company of all the knots before it. The net grows whole in small increments too modest to announce themselves. The mender's hands continue patient and capable, while the morning opens slowly over Hull and the Humber lies grey beyond the roofs. Nothing is rushed, nothing asks sharply for attention. The work simply holds and holds and holds. And if we stay with that holding a little longer, we begin to notice how the whole harbour depends upon such quiet continuations. A vessel may have a name painted on its bow, a skipper may have a reputation, and a market may have figures entered neatly in ledgers, but underneath all of that is the unglamorous fact of gear kept fit for use. The 1940s Hull net mender belongs to this underneath place, where nothing shines for long, and where the day's dignity is measured by whether the repaired thing can return to its work. The room has a way of teaching patience before anyone speaks. You enter with cold hands, perhaps thinking of the street behind you, and before long your attention has narrowed to the mesh lying across the bench. The outer world does not vanish, but it softens. Wheels pass, voices rise and lower, gulls call from the roofs, and all the while the shuttle moves in that intimate pattern of passage, turn, pull, and tightening. The mind follows because the hands have gone first. A new tear is opened across the lap, and it is not a clean break. It has travelled unevenly, pulling several squares out of shape, and the mender studies it the way a person might study a cracked window, looking not only at the break, but at the pressure that made it spread. Her thumb presses one knot, then another. She lifts a border and lets it fall. The twine has gone pale in places where strain has rubbed away the darker surface, leaving a dry, tired thread beneath. You can feel how careful she must be here, because a tear like this can trick the eye into mending the wrong line first. If she begins badly, the whole patch may draw crooked, and the net will lie with a twist that no one wants to discover later on deck. So she counts from the sound mesh, then counts again. Not quickly, but with the even care of someone who has learned that counting twice is faster than undoing once. The room waits with her. The first new knot goes in at the edge of certainty. Then another. The shuttle passes beneath a strand that has not quite failed, and she pauses, considering whether to leave it or cut it away. You sit close enough to see the decision in her fingers. They test the strand, bend it, pull lightly, and finally the knife comes up, because a weak strand spared for kindness may become a larger tear at sea. There is no hardness in that decision. It is only accuracy. The hull net mender knows the difference between saving and merely postponing trouble, and that knowledge has come through years of small consequences, rather than any formal lesson. She cuts out the weakness, lays the new twine in place, and the repair begins to take a cleaner shape. The old pattern, which had looked confused a few minutes before, starts to show itself through the damage, like a path under snow. By now, the stove has made a mild circle of warmth, though the corners of the room remain cold. You can smell coal dust when the fire is disturbed, and the damp wool of coats where steam has begun to rise from them. There is tea on a ledge, a little too strong, and perhaps a bottle of milk kept cool near the door. No one speaks much for a while. The work is speaking in its own narrow way. The mender's posture changes with the size of the repair. For small holes, she bends close, elbows near the body, fingers working almost delicately against the coarse net. For larger gaps, she draws her arms wide, taking in a broader section, letting the shoulder and back share the labor that the fingers cannot carry alone. You can see how the body adapts without instruction, finding the shape required by the object before it. That quiet adaptation is part of the craft. Outside, Hull's winter light lies flat across brick and water, touching everything without brightening it very much. The streets near the dock carry mud, grit, and small scraps of straw or paper pressed into damp corners by traffic and weather. Men pass in caps pulled low, women move quickly with bags close to their sides. The city has a worn look, but also a working look, as if repair itself has become one of its ordinary expressions. Inside, the net mender makes a join where the old and new twine meet. This is not merely tying one piece to another. The join must sit where it will not snag, and the loose end must be managed so it does not tease itself free under use. She sets it neatly into the structure, pulls it down, tests it, then lets her hand hover for half a moment before moving on. The little pause is almost a blessing, though she would not call it that. We may think of nets as empty things, made mostly of holes, but in this room you learn that emptiness has to be shaped. Each opening must be the right size, and every space depends on the lines around it. Too much looseness, and the net loses its purpose. Too much tightness, and it cannot move properly in water. The mender is not filling emptiness. She is making emptiness useful again. That thought fits the dock too, in its own quiet way. A harbour is full of spaces made useful, water held between quays, warehouses arranged around movement, alleys and sheds and yards, shaped by the need to pass things from hand to hand. The hull net mender works on a smaller version of the same idea, arranging openings, restoring edges, making sure that what passes through and what is held back will do so according to the old intention. It is humble work, but not simple. The afternoon might bring a different kind of net, or a different section from the same one, and with it, a change in texture. Some parts are stiffer from treatment, some softer from long use, some unpleasantly damp, some almost dry and prickly against the skin. Your fingers notice before your thoughts do. The mender's fingers notice even more, because they have become instruments of comparison, remembering how each kind of cord should behave when healthy, strained, or failing. A younger worker might ask how she knows, and the answer may be no more than, "You can feel it." That can sound mysterious until enough years have passed. Then it becomes exact. The hand learns 1,000 tiny differences and gives them back as certainty. This is the kind of knowledge that does not travel well into books, not because it is vague, but because it is too closely married to pressure, smell, movement, and touch. She reloads the shuttle when the twine runs low, and the pause brings a different rhythm into the room. The line is wound in smooth turns, one over another, until the tool is full enough to continue. You hear the faint scrape of fiber over wood, and the small settling sound as the wound twine tightens into place. It is preparation, but preparation is not separate from work. It is the quiet hinge between one stretch of attention and the next. The mender may look up then, perhaps toward the window, where the glass is clouded at the edges and marked by salt, soot, and weather. For a moment her eyes leave the net and rest on the dim square of outside light. You can imagine what she sees. Not a scenic view, perhaps only brick, roofline, a passing shape, and the pale movement of cloud beyond the dock. Still, even that small distance is a relief after staring so long into mesh. Then she returns. The shuttle slips through, the knot forms, and the pattern resumes. It is almost like a song that has paused for breath. Not a bright song, and not one meant for performance, but the kind of tune a working hand might carry without sound. Under, around, through, draw tight. Under, around, through, draw tight. The repetition is soothing because it is purposeful, and because each return makes the torn place a little more whole. There are days when the workroom might be crowded, and the nets spread nearly to the limits of available floor. On such days, everyone learns to step carefully. A careless boot can catch a loop, drag a section, or spoil the order someone has spent minutes restoring. The floor becomes a map of other people's labor. You move through it with awareness, placing your feet between folds, apologizing softly if you brush against a line, and learning that respect can be practical before it is spoken. The sounds of many menders together are larger but still not loud. Several shuttles tap and slide, chairs shift, a kettle is moved. Someone laughs under her breath. Someone mutters at a knot that has tightened before it should. These human sounds sit inside the work, not above it, and they make the room feel less lonely without making it restless. We listen as if seated near a warm wall, letting the voices remain indistinct and kind. In such a room, the hull net mender is both an individual and part of a group. Her hands have their own habits, but the work around her shares a common pace. One person may be quicker at long tiers, another better at awkward joins, another patient with young learners or stubborn old gear. Skills are known without being displayed. A quiet hierarchy forms, based not on speeches, but on who can be trusted with the difficult piece when it comes in wet, tangled, and needed soon. The difficult piece arrives with a smell of fresh trouble. It may be dropped near the door with a heavy slap, dark with water and streaked with weed. The person who brings it may say only where it came from or when it must be ready, because in working places, the object itself often explains the rest. The mender looks over, wipes her hands, and makes room. The day, which had settled into a known rhythm, bends slightly to receive the new demand. Even then, the pace does not become frantic. It becomes focused. The net is spread as well as the space allows, the worst damage found, the edges freed from the tangle, and the repair divided into what must be done first and what can wait. You feel the calm authority of people used to interruptions. They do not need to dramatize urgency. They simply place their hands where the work needs them and begin again. The damaged section may smell more strongly of the sea than the older heap, with a green edge of weed and the sharp metallic tang of fish. Cold water drips onto the boards, making dark spots that widen slowly. Someone puts down a sack or rag, to catch the worst of it. The mender kneels or bends, depending on the angle, and her skirt or coat brushes the damp floor. This is not comfortable work, but comfort has rarely been the first condition of usefulness. You can feel the strain in a larger repair because the arms must pull more often and more firmly. The new line must be drawn through thicker, wetter cord, and each knot must be set against the drag of the net's own weight. The fingers redden, the wrist turns, the back holds steady until it must straighten for relief. Then the work folds the body down again, not cruelly, but insistently, with the quiet authority of a task not yet finished. There may be a clock somewhere, though clocks in such rooms can feel less powerful than daylight, weather, and the arrival of work. Still, the hour matters. A vessel waiting on gear is not waiting in a romantic sense. Time costs money, tide, readiness, and sometimes temper. The mender knows this without needing to be told. Her repair must be good, but it must also arrive in the world in time to be useful. This is another hidden balance. Too quick, and the mend may fail. Too slow, and the delay may trouble others. She works between those pressures, choosing where precision cannot be spared and where practical sufficiency will do. Such judgment is rarely visible after the fact. When the net holds, no one sees the choices that made it hold. When it fails, everyone may notice. Quiet skill often lives under this unfair arrangement, yet there is no bitterness in the motion we are watching, or at least none we need to invent. The mender may have her private complaints, as anyone would. She may be tired of cold floors, damp sleeves, and the sting of twine across a cracked finger. But while the shuttle is moving, the work gathers her attention into something cleaner than complaint. There is the next knot, there is the next square, there is the old line and the new one meeting under her hand. The large repair begins to settle. Its edges no longer sprawl in confusion. The new mesh has found the old pattern, and the worst of the tear has become a field of ordered openings. People nearby may glance at it and understand without praise that the trouble is passing. The room's tension lowers by a degree. Someone reaches for tea, someone else returns to a smaller task. The difficult piece has been brought back within the ordinary. That is often what repair does. It returns a thing from emergency to routine. It takes what was suddenly a problem and makes it boring again, and there is deep mercy in that. A net that can be used is not exciting. A door that closes, a shoe that holds, a lamp that lights, a seam that does not split. These things are quiet after repair because quietness is their success. The hull net mender spent her days creating that kind of quiet. As the repaired section is lifted and tested, it hangs with a slight difference where new twine meets old, but the shape is right. She runs both hands over it, feeling for uneven pull. The net shifts like a heavy curtain, rough, damp and faintly cold against the palms. A few drops fall from the lower edge. The floor takes them without comment. The work, for this section, is nearly done. Nearly done still requires attention. Loose ends are trimmed. A knot is retightened. A questionable strand is marked or replaced. The mender's face may show fatigue now, especially around the eyes, but her hands have not become careless. You notice this because tired people sometimes reveal their craft most clearly at the end of a long task, when habit must carry what freshness can no longer provide. Her habit is strong. Someone may come to take the repaired gear, and the exchange is brief. A question, a nod, perhaps a practical remark about where the worst part was. The net is gathered and lifted, leaving a darker dampness behind on the boards. For a moment, the room seems larger without it. Then another section is pulled forward, and the space fills again with the same kind of work. Because one completed repair is only one completed repair, you can understand why memory lets such days blur. If you ask someone years later about a particular Thursday at the bench, there may be little to separate it from the Wednesday before or the Friday after. The details repeat until they become atmosphere. Yet repetition does not mean emptiness. It means a life was made of actions so necessary that no single one demanded a title, and still each one mattered in its place. The hull net mender may remember certain days not by dates, but by weather, by the condition of a net, by who was ill, by whether the stove smoked, by whether the tea ran out too early. Working memory often keeps its own calendar. The winter of cracked hands. The week the river fog sat low. The day a new girl tied her first sound patch. The afternoon when everyone stayed late because a vessel needed gear before morning. These are ordinary markers, and they are intimate. We let those markers rise slowly, like objects seen through mist. A brown cup on the ledge, a wet hem, a hand held near the stove, the pale face of a clock, a line of cork floats stacked against a wall, a shuttle passing from one worker to another because someone's own has split or gone missing under a fold of net. None of it is dramatic. All of it belongs. The physical world of the Mender's day is full of small resistances. Twine resists the pull, cold resists the body, damp resists drying, scarcity resists ease, time resists perfection. Yet each resistance is met not with force alone, but with adjustment. And perhaps that is why the scene feels restful to us now. The work is not conquering anything. It is answering again and again in the measure required. As evening nears, the sound outside changes, and the hull net mender begins to prepare for the end of the working day without fully trusting it. There may always be one more thing brought in, one more small mend, one more question about whether this can be ready, so the tools are not put away too soon, and the hands do not relax completely until the day has truly released them. You may know this feeling from other forms of work, the body waiting for permission to stop. The last repair is sometimes the hardest to begin, not because it is technically difficult, but because tiredness has made the distance between now and finished seem longer. She lifts the net anyway. The tear is modest, a small break near an edge, the sort of thing that might have been easy in the morning. Now it asks for the same care through slower fingers. She gives it that care, and the modest tear is granted the dignity of being done properly. There is a gentleness in not ranking tasks too sharply at day's end. Small work still matters. A little hole can become a larger one if ignored, and a quick, careless knot can become a nuisance for someone else tomorrow. The mender knows this in her bones, so she counts, ties, checks, trims, and smooths the edge while the light lowers and the room takes on the brown-grey colour of late working hours. The air is close with damp fibre and coal smoke. When she finally sets the shuttle down, it does not mean history has ended, or even that the work has ended forever. It means only that this day has reached its limit. Tools are wiped, covered, or placed where morning hands will find them. The bench is cleared enough, the floor is swept enough. Enough, again, becomes a good word because it allows people to go home. The mender stands, and perhaps for a second she stays still, letting her back remember its full height. That small, upright pause is easy to miss. It contains the whole day. Then she reaches for her coat, adjusts a scarf, gathers whatever she brought with her, and moves toward the door with the ordinary carefulness of someone stepping from a workroom into cold air. The room remains behind, holding heat for a few minutes after the people leave. Outside, dusk has come down over the dock with wet softness. Lamps are beginning to matter. Their light reflects in puddles and along metal edges, turning ordinary objects briefly golden before the grey takes them back. A cart or lorry moves past, making the ground shiver faintly. Somewhere, a man calls out, and his voice is rounded by fog or river damp until the words lose their edges. We walk with her only in the loosest sense, keeping a respectful distance. She passes places that hold the day's other labours, fish sheds, warehouses, yards, offices, and doorways where people stand for a final word before going home. The smells change step by step. Fish, smoke, wet stone, horse or engine, bread from somewhere inland, and the faint, clean bite of cold air moving off the river. Hull is not one smell, one sound, or one memory. It is a mesh of them, and she is one strand among many. The city's repairs show themselves in the evening if you look gently. New brick against old, a boarded window, a patch of roof, a gap where light falls strangely because something that once blocked it is gone. The 1940s were not gentle years for Hull, yet daily labour continued to stitch ordinary life across damaged places. The net mender's work at the bench becomes part of this wider pattern, though no one walking past would say so aloud. At home, or on the way there, She may buy something small if shops and rationing allow, or carry what has already been arranged. Her thoughts may be practical, domestic, tired. The torn net does not accompany her as an image of noble labor. It is simply the day's work, now behind her, and tomorrow's work, waiting in a slightly different form. We honor her better by allowing that plainness, because real working lives are not always thinking of how they will be remembered. Still, memory can be kind when it comes late. It can return not to invent grandeur, but to notice texture. The roughness of the cord, the ache of the fingers, the murmur of women working in a cold room near the dock, the shuttle worn smooth by use, the small pride of seeing a torn section hang properly again. These things are enough to bring her near, and near is all we need. Night gathers. The harbour lowers its voice. Nets rest in heaps or aboard vessels, holding new knots and old stains together in the dark. The mender's hands are finally still, perhaps folded around a cup, perhaps busy with some smaller domestic task, perhaps resting in her lap while conversation passes around her. The day does not need an ending more elaborate than that. It has spent itself in useful motions, and somewhere, in the cool workroom left behind, a few stray fibres cling to the bench where the last repair was made. They are almost nothing. A breath could move them. A morning sleeve will brush them away. Yet for now they lie in the lamplight's fading memory, pale against the wood, like the smallest possible record of a person who sat there, worked carefully, and helped the sea's torn pattern hold together for another day. By morning, those stray fibres are gone, and the bench has taken on the day's first weight again, with damp netting spread across it like weather made solid. The hull net mender comes back into the room with the same practical motions, laying down her things, checking the twine, and warming her hands just long enough to make them useful. You can feel the cold in the shuttle before she closes her fingers around it, and you can hear the small scrape of chair legs as the work gathers everyone into its familiar shape. There is a particular quiet that belongs to people who know what they are doing. It is not silence, because there are always sounds: the kettle, the door, the gulls, the soft complaint of wet cord being moved across wood. It is quiet because no one wastes much force finding the beginning. Each hand knows its task, each eye looks for damage, and each body settles into the room as if taking its place inside a pattern that was waiting for it. The first net of the day has dried stiffly in places, and the fibres make a faint crackle when the folds are opened. It smells different from the wetter ones, less like fresh river and more like old salt, tar, dust, and the sourness that can gather when damp things have been shut away too long. The mender lifts it carefully, because stiffness can hide weakness. A strand that feels firm may only be brittle, and a knot that looks sound may give under a patient pull. You sit with us near the edge of the bench, where the light is best, and after a while you begin to see how looking becomes a kind of touching. Her eyes move along the mesh with the same steadiness as her fingers, noting small changes of angle and tension. A square that has lost its shape tells a story. A row that leans slightly out of line tells another. Nothing shouts. Everything offers evidence quietly, if someone has learned how to notice. The 1940s hull net mender does not work in a world of abundance, and that fact touches even the smallest decisions. A length of twine is not wasted to make a repair prettier than it needs to be. A usable piece of old line is not thrown aside because it has lost its fresh look. The knife cuts with care, not meanness, because care is the habit of people who understand that supplies, wages, daylight and warmth all have limits. Within those limits, the work still asks to be done well. A new piece is measured against the damaged section, and the mender's thumb holds the place while her other hand reaches for the shuttle. The movement is so practiced that it seems almost slow, though in truth there is no hesitation in it. She has already decided the length, the angle, the route through the mesh, and the knot that will hold best beside the older cord. The rest is the body carrying out what experience has quietly arranged. There may be a window above her, misted at the corners, with a thin line of condensation gathering at the bottom of the pane. Outside, the sky has the color of tin, and the buildings beyond it appear flattened by cloud. You hear rain beginning not as a downpour, but as a soft stippling against glass and roof, and someone glances up only briefly before returning to the work. Rain is not news at the dock. It is one of the materials of the day. The damp in the air changes the feel of the twine. It swells a little, drags slightly through the fingers, and keeps the knots from sliding too freely. The mender adjusts without needing to think much about it, pulling a fraction harder, leaving a fraction more allowance, reading the response of the material through the skin. This is one of the quiet refinements that disappear when a job is described too quickly. The same task is never quite the same under different weather. When a gust presses rain against the window, the room seems to draw closer around the people inside it. Coats hang darkly by the door. Steam rises from tea. The stove gives off a dull, uneven warmth that reaches one knee more than the other. Somewhere, damp wool meets heat and releases that deep, homely smell of weather being driven out of cloth. You breathe it in, and it belongs to the work as surely as rope and fish do. The mender begins repairing a place near the edge of the net where the border line has taken strain. Edges matter. They take handling, hauling, folding, dragging, and the impatient pull of men trying to finish a job in cold weather. If the edge fails, the damage can travel quickly inward, so she gives it patient attention, setting the new twine against the old line with a firmness that feels almost architectural. The net is flexible, but its order must be built. Her hands move in a sequence you can follow now, though not yet imitate. She passes the shuttle, draws the twine, keeps the gauge steady, sets the knot, checks the pull, and lets the finished mesh fall gently aside. Then she does it again. The repetition is soothing because it is neither empty nor dramatic. It has purpose, and purpose gives a soft weight to time, making the minutes pass like cord through the hand. Around mid-morning, someone opens the door, and a wet smell from the yard enters with them. River air, rain, fish boxes, coal smoke, and the muddy odor of boots that have crossed too many damp surfaces. The room cools at once. A few heads turn. The person at the door says something practical, perhaps about another net waiting, perhaps about a message from a vessel, and then the door closes again with a low wooden thud. The menders return to their benches. The interruption leaves a tremor in the room, not of alarm, but of rearrangement. Workplaces live by such changes, by what comes through the door and what must be fitted into an already full day. The hull net mender glances at the heap beside her, judging what can be finished before the next piece arrives. Her eyes are calm, but they are not idle. Every hour has to stretch around the shape of the work. You learn that time in a mending room is not quite clock time. It is measured by sections repaired, twine used, light changing, kettles boiled, fingers stiffening, and the slow lessening of a heap that may be replaced before it is gone. A clock may say the morning is passing, but the net says whether enough has been done. The mender listens to both, though the net has the more immediate voice. A young learner makes a mistake nearby, pulling one mesh too tight, so the surrounding row puckers like cloth drawn badly in a seam. The older mender notices without sharply interrupting, and after a moment she says to look at the neighbors, not just the knot. That is all. The learner looks, sees the error, and begins to loosen it with awkward care. The correction is quiet, but it contains a whole principle of the craft. No knot lives alone. The same could be said of the harbour, and perhaps of the city, though no one in the workroom needs the comparison. Still, we can feel it gently as we sit there. Each task leans against another. Each repair supports a voyage, each voyage supports a market, each market supports a table, and each table sends someone back into the cold morning to work again. A net is a plain object, yet it teaches interdependence by its very structure. The rain thickens for a while, and the light in the room becomes more subdued. Drops track down the glass and bend the view outside into wavering shapes. The mender pulls the net closer, making a private pool of work between her body and the bench. The shuttle moves inside that pool. Her fingers are reddened now, the skin near the nails roughened by salt and fibre, yet the motions remain even, as if the hands have accepted what the day will ask. There is a comfort in watching competence when it is not performed. Nobody is trying to impress us. Nobody is explaining the work into importance. The importance sits in the result, in the fact that torn gear becomes usable, and usable gear goes back to the vessel, and the vessel does not wait longer than it must. The hull net mender's calm is not decorative. It is one of the practical tools of the room. By late morning, the rain eases, and the air outside brightens by a shade, though the sun still stays hidden. The menders section is nearly whole, and she lifts it higher to check the new pattern against the old. You can see the repair now as a pale area. Not pretty, exactly, but clean in its logic. The squares align, the edge sits firm. The strain will pass through it without finding an obvious weakness, and that is the quiet promise she has made to the net. She trims the last loose end with a short movement of the knife. The cut strand falls to the bench, no longer than a small piece of straw. Such remnants gather during the day, and if you run your hand over the bench later, you may find them clinging to damp patches or lodged in scratches. They are the shavings of repair, the little leftovers that prove something has been remade. Most will be swept away. A few will travel home on cuffs. The next piece waiting for her is older, darker, and more heavily worn. Its knots have thickened from use, and some are hard as small seeds under the fingers. It carries the smell of long service, salt tar, fish, weed, and perhaps a trace of storage in a close place. The mender does not sigh when she sees it, or if she does, the sigh is gentle and brief. Old things can still work if they are understood. This net asks for judgment before labor. There is no point spending hours on a section too far gone to serve, but neither should a useful piece be condemned because it looks tired. She tests the cord, pulls the border, bends a few strands, and studies how the mesh responds. Her face remains quiet. You can almost feel the scales inside her mind, weighing time, material, need, and likelihood. The decision to mend is itself a skilled act. She chooses a section and begins. The old cord resists the new twine, as if suspicious of being asked to cooperate with something cleaner and more elastic. The knots sit awkwardly at first. She works them into place with thumb pressure, a small twist, and the steady pull of someone who knows not to bully old fiber. A careless hand could snap what remains sound. A patient hand persuades it to take the repair. The workshop smells stronger as the day warms slightly. Damp begins to lift from the nets, carrying with it the dense odors stored in the fibers. It is not the clean salt smell of a postcard sea, but the working smell of docks, where the sea arrives mixed with fish blood, mud, oil, tar, smoke, sweat, and old timber. You do not need to like it at first. After hours beside the bench, it becomes part of the room's truth. A church bell may sound somewhere beyond the docks, softened by weather and distance, and its note passes faintly through the industrial murmur. The mender does not look up. Bells belong to the wider day, but the knot in her hand belongs to this immediate second. Still, the sound reaches us, and for a moment the city feels layered, spiritual and practical, domestic and industrial, all sharing the same grey air over Hull. Then the bell fades, and the shuttle continues. The old net reveals more weakness as it opens, and that is often how repair behaves. Once you begin, hidden trouble appears. A strand near the tear is frayed, another has been stretched, a knot has hardened badly and will not sit right beside new work. The mender takes each discovery without surprise. She has known too many nets, too many days, and too many human arrangements to believe that visible damage is always the whole of the matter. She cuts back a little farther than planned, then a little farther again, until the repair has a clean field in which to grow. This means more work, but less waste in the long run. You can see the old shape receding, the damaged part becoming an absence, and then the new mesh gradually filling the absence with measured openings. It is slow, but the slowness has a deep reason. The net must learn its shape again. At the next bench, someone hums under her breath, perhaps without realizing. The tune is low and fragmentary, rising only for a bar or two before dissolving into breath and work. No one asks what it is. Such humming belongs to rooms where repetitive labor lets a person keep a little inner warmth. The sound rests under the shuttle taps, under the rain drips from coats, under the faint hiss of the stove, and it makes the air more human. The whole net mender may have her own private rhythms, little habits that no one else would note unless they sat with her for many days. Perhaps she taps the shuttle once against the bench before starting a new row. Perhaps she smooths the twine with 2 fingers after each join. Perhaps she leans back at the same point in every long repair, not quite resting, only allowing her eyes to widen from the close mesh to the whole net. These habits are small signatures. They are the kind of signatures history rarely preserves. A name in a register tells us one thing. A wage book tells us another. A photograph, if there is one, may show faces and aprons, benches and heaps of net, but it cannot quite give back the pressure of thumb against knot. It cannot give the room's cold floor through worn shoes, or the way tea tasted after 3 hours of salt-stiff cord. For that, we have to imagine carefully, staying close to the work. The old net begins to improve under her hands. It will never look new, and perhaps nobody wants it to. Newness can be less reassuring than soundness in a working object. The mender knows that weathered gear has its own settled behavior if its weaknesses are tended. She restores not youth, but function. There is maturity in that, a calm acceptance that usefulness does not depend on looking untouched. By the time the midday pause arrives, the repaired area has grown large enough to fold across her lap. She sets the shuttle down and flexes her hands, slowly, as if each finger must be invited back from the shape of the work. The knuckles are stiff, the skin is rough, a tiny fiber clings near the thumb, and she brushes it away before reaching for her cup. The tea is hot enough to steam her face, and she holds it with both hands. You feel the room exhale during these pauses. The nets remain, but for a few minutes they stop asking. Conversation drifts in low currents, not always cheerful, not always sad, just alive with ordinary matters. Someone mentions rain coming through a roof. Someone else says, a child needs new shoes. There is a remark about cues, a half laugh about a stubborn neighbor, and a silence in which everyone drinks. The workroom becomes a kitchen for a little while, though the nets still lie everywhere. Then, as always, the pause thins. The cup is set down, the chair moves. The mender wipes her mouth with the back of her hand, or a folded cloth, and her eyes return to the net before her fingers do. You can see the mind entering the pattern again, finding the last knot made, the next line to take, and the place where old weakness still waits. The afternoon begins not with a command, but with attention settling back into place. This afternoon's light is gentler than the morning's, warmer in color, though not in heat. It lies along the net in narrow strips, catching on knots and making the twine look briefly golden where it is most worn. Dust turns slowly in the air. A door opens and closes somewhere deeper in the building. The mender leans forward, and the golden places disappear under her hands as she draws the repair toward completion. There is no single motion that finishes a large mend. It ends through a series of small confirmations. A last row aligns. A join tightens properly. A border lies flat. The hand finds no hidden slack. The eye travels the shape and does not stop in alarm. Only then does the mender allow the section to fall from her lap, heavy and obedient, into the larger heap waiting to be gathered. A younger worker may ask whether it will hold, and the older mender may answer, it should, which in a working place is often as much certainty as honesty allows. The sea will have its say later. The crew will have theirs. Weather, weight, and use will enter the matter. But the repair has been made according to knowledge, and knowledge has done what it can. There is peace in that kind of answer, neither boastful nor fearful. We stay near the bench as another task is drawn forward, because this is how the day continues, not through grand changes, but through patient succession. One net, then another. One tear, then another. One cup of tea cooling while one knot is made, and then one more. The whole net mender lives in this succession, and her skill is partly the ability to keep giving fresh care to things that resemble one another, without becoming careless from familiarity. Outside, carts, lorries, bicycles, and footsteps make their layered passage over wet ground. The port smells of work. The sky lowers. The tide moves beyond the buildings with old indifference, carrying silt, reflections, and the memory of weather from farther out. Inside, the mender's world is smaller, bounded by bench, net, tool, cup, stove, window, and the steady company of others who understand why the smallest repair must not be dismissed. If you listen long enough, the room's sounds become almost like breathing. The pull of twine is an inhale. The tightening knot is an exhale. The shifting net is a blanket drawn up and settled. The stove murmurs, the kettle taps softly as it cools, and rainwater continues to drip from some coat hem near the door. Nothing hurries you onward. The day asks only that you remain with what is being done. The mender reaches the end of another row, checks it, and presses the knots flat with the side of her thumb. Her eyes are tired, but their tiredness is steady rather than scattered. Years of close work train a person to continue gently, even when sharpness dulls. She may bring the mesh closer to the window, angling it toward what remains of the light. The pattern appears, fades, and appears again as the net shifts in her hands. This is a good place to remember that forgetting is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is the result of work done so faithfully that it blends into the ordinary survival of everyone around it. People remembered the fish, the ships, the storms, the prices, the damage, the men who left and returned, or did not. The net mender's labor was woven into all of those things, but like the knots she tied, it was easiest to overlook when it held properly. Yet we are not overlooking it now. We are sitting in the grey room with the wet floor and the worn bench, letting the hands be the center of the scene. We are noticing how the shuttle crosses the gap. We are noticing how the new twine becomes part of the old. We are noticing the calm authority of repetition and the way a forgotten job can still speak when we give it enough quiet. Late afternoon arrives softly, without a clear edge. One moment there is still some pallor at the window, and the next the room depends more upon lamp and stove glow. The mender's shadow lengthens across the net, and for a while her hands work inside that shadow, pale fingers moving through dark mesh. The effect is almost like looking into water. Things appear, join, vanish, and return. The final task of the day may be not mending, but laying out, sorting, and preparing what tomorrow will require. That, too, is work. A careless ending makes a cruel beginning. She gathers the usable twine, separates the worst tangles, marks the section that needs first attention, and makes sure the tools will be found in the morning. Future comfort is built from present discipline, often by tired hands. You can hear fatigue in the room now, not as complaint, but as slower movement. Chairs scrape more heavily. Someone laughs with less breath behind it. A cough lasts a little longer. The kettle is not refilled because the day is too near its end. The mender ties off the last manageable piece, looks at what remains, and decides not to begin what cannot be properly finished. That decision, too, is skill. Work must know when to stop. If it goes on past care, it can make new trouble under the appearance of diligence. The hull net mender understands this, perhaps not as a saying, but as a practice. She does not begin a repair that poor light and tired hands might spoil. She prepares it instead, laying it ready for morning, when the eyes will be clearer and the first cold will be answered by fresh attention. Tools return to their places with small domestic sounds. The shuttle rests, the knife is put away safely, twine is covered or tucked into a bag. A rag wipes the bench where damp has gathered. Loose fibers are swept into a small pile and cleared from the walking path. The room is not made spotless, because spotless is not a reasonable ambition here. It is made ready, which is better. The mender stands, slowly enough that her back can forgive her. You feel that movement in your own body if you have been sitting with the scene for a long while. The straightening, the brief stillness, the shoulders lowering, the hands opening and closing once more before gloves are pulled on. There is no audience for this small recovery of height. It is simply how a working day leaves a person. When she steps outside, the rain has stopped, but everything it touched remains dark. Stones shine under lamplight. The air smells washed and smoky at once. Somewhere water runs in a gutter with a thin, persistent sound, and the river wind carries a chill that goes immediately through damp cloth. She pulls her coat close, and we follow at a distance through the evening that gathers around Hull like a shawl. The repaired nets stay behind or travel onward, depending on need. But either way, they belong now to the next part of the labor chain. The mender has done what could be done. Tomorrow there will be more. There is sadness in that if we choose to hear it. But there is also calm, because the continuity of work can be a form of shelter. One day joins the next, as one mesh joins another, and the pattern, though worn, continues. Homeward streets hold their own mending. Curtains drawn against cold. a patched coat at a shoulder, a repaired pram wheel, rattling but still turning, a shop front made serviceable after damage, a kettle singing in a kitchen where the ceiling stain has been there for years. Once you have spent the day with the hull net mender, you begin to see repair everywhere, not as failure, but as the ordinary art of keeping life in use. The city does not announce this art. It wears it, in brick, cloth, rope, wood, metal, and human habit. Hull carries marks of what has been broken and made serviceable again. The net mender is one worker among many, but her trade gives us a clear and tender image of that broader truth. She does not erase damage from history. She makes it possible for the next day to go on. And now the workroom is dim again, emptied of voices, with the prepared net waiting where morning hands will find it. The bench cools, the stove fades. The window holds only a vague reflection of the room and the darker shape of the dock beyond it. A shuttle lies still, wound with enough twine for the first repair. It seems almost to be sleeping, if at all can sleep, with tomorrow's labor already resting inside it. You can let your attention settle there, on that simple tool, and the quiet room around it. The day's warmth leaves slowly. The smell of damp net remains. Outside, the tide turns in the darkness, and the city lowers itself into night by degrees, lamp by lamp, footstep by footstep, breath by breath. Nothing needs to be finished beyond what has been finished. Nothing asks to be remembered loudly. The knots have been tied, the tools have been placed, and the pattern is waiting to be taken up again. When morning returns, it does not arrive all at once, but gathers along the window in a slow, colourless widening of the glass. The hull net mender comes back to the bench before the room has entirely lost its night chill, and for a moment her breath is visible above the net, waiting there. The prepared tear lies exactly where she left it, not healed by darkness, not worsened either, simply patient in the grey light. You sit with us again beside the work, and the day opens by inches. The first touch of the net is always a reminder. It is colder than cloth, heavier than it appears, and faintly damp even when it has been indoors all night. The smell rises as the folds are moved. Old salt, tar, fish, smoke, and the wooden closeness of the room itself. Somewhere behind her, a kettle begins its low, trembling note, and the sound is so ordinary that it seems to belong to the net as much as to the stove. This is how the morning begins, in small agreements. She takes the waiting edge and looks again at yesterday's decision. Good workers check their own preparation, not because they distrust themselves, but because morning sometimes reveals what evening concealed. The light is better now, though still thin, and it shows one strand she had marked for replacing. Her thumb finds it before her eyes settle on it. The strand bends too easily, a little dry at its heart, and the knife comes up with the quiet certainty of a thing already decided. The cut is clean, and the weak piece falls away. For a second, the gap looks worse, as repairs often do when the damaged part has been honestly removed. Then the mender threads the shuttle through the sound mesh beside it, and the first new line begins to cross the absence. You can feel the reassurance of that motion. It does not fix everything at once. It simply says, here is the beginning, and that is enough. As the knot tightens, the room seems to settle around the task. A chair scrapes gently across the boards. Someone takes down a bundle of twine. Rainwater from yesterday has dried in darker stains near the door, and the air smells faintly of coal before the fire catches properly. The hull net mender works inside these details as naturally as breathing, not separating tool, weather, light, and body, because all of them belong to the same day's labor. The bench has many histories beneath her hands. It has held nets from vessels whose names were once spoken daily and are now perhaps only faint marks in records. It has held hurried repairs, patient repairs, botched repairs undone by sharper eyes, and long sections restored while people talked of ordinary sorrows and ordinary meals. You can run your gaze along its surface and see cuts, stains, dents, and smoothed places where elbows rested. Nothing there was made for beauty, yet use has made it beautiful in its own restrained way. The mender's shuttle moves with a pace that can seem hypnotic, especially when you stop trying to count each passage. It goes through, around, back and down, and the twine follows like a quiet answer to a question asked by the broken mesh. Her left hand holds the shape while the right hand completes it. Then the hands exchange their small duties without announcement, and the next opening is measured against the old pattern. At another bench, someone clears a throat and begins speaking about the weather, because weather is never an empty subject in a port. Wind from the east has a different meaning than wind from the west. Rain affects drying, fog delays movement, frost stiffens cord, and rough water writes itself into the gear that returns. The talk is not ornamental. It is information carried in familiar phrases, and the hull net mender listens without lifting her head. A vessel's name is mentioned, then another. The names pass through the room softly, not as romance, but as practical references tied to gear, crews, habits, and expected wear. Some nets are recognized the way certain coats are recognized, by patch color, smell, and known trouble spots. The mender may know which one has a border that always suffers, or which skipper dislikes a repair that looks too pale. Such knowledge is local, perishable, and deeply useful. You begin to feel how the forgotten work depends on memory stored outside written lines. She remembers the last time this net came in. She remembers where a similar tear opened during a previous season. She remembers the feel of a certain batch of cord and whether it held well after treatment. None of this is grand enough for public ceremony, but inside the room it has weight. It guides the hand before anyone can explain the guidance. The morning's repair grows steadily, and soon the gap has become a loose grid of fresh twine waiting to be tightened into full agreement. The new mesh looks pale beside the older material, like a recently healed scar against weathered skin. She does not mind the difference. Color will change. Salt, sun, handling, and use will darken it soon enough. What matters now is the lie of the line, the size of the openings, and whether strain will pass through without catching at a weakness. A cup of tea is set near her elbow, and steam bends toward the cold window. She lets it stand for a moment because the knot in her fingers needs finishing before the hand can release its thought. This is a common bargain in working rooms. Comfort delayed by half a minute, then another half, until the immediate task has yielded. Finally she drinks, and the warmth moves visibly into her face, not as pleasure loudly shown, but as a slight softening around the eyes. The tea is strong, a little tannic, perhaps slightly sweet if sugar is available, and it carries the taste of tin milk and the day's first kindness. She sets it down, and a dark ring joins older rings on the bench. No one wipes it away at once. The mark belongs there for now, one more circle in a room made of repeated use. The shuttle returns to her hand, and the tea's warmth fades slowly from her fingers into the twine. The hull net mender does not need to hurry this section, because the damage is awkward enough to punish haste. She works from the outside inward, drawing the repair into alignment with the sound border. The motion is quiet, but not vague. Every pull has a limit, every knot a place, every joining a reason. You can feel the intelligence of restraint in it, because she knows that the hardest part is often not doing more than the net can accept. If she pulls too tightly, the border will curl. If she leaves too much slack, the mesh will hang like a pocket, gathering strain where it should distribute it. So she takes the middle way, not as a moral lesson, but as a craft necessity learned through repetition. Her hands find the pressure that belongs. They do not argue with the material. They ask, feel the answer, and adjust. The light brightens slightly after mid-morning, and the room reveals more of itself. Dust lies on the upper beams, salt gathers faintly on a nail head, and a forgotten length of cord hangs from a peg like a loose line in an old drawing. The window shows a pale strip of sky and a darker roof line beyond it. You hear footsteps outside, then the distant clatter of boxes, softened by wall and weather. The world beyond the bench continues, but the net keeps us here. There is something restful in the fact that the mender's attention is so specific. She is not trying to hold the whole future of Hull in her mind. She is holding one line, one tear, one repair, whose usefulness will join larger usefulness later. Many working lives proceed this way, not by grasping the whole, but by tending the nearest necessary thing. The whole depends upon it, whether or not it notices. A learner nearby has been given a smaller patch, and you can hear the difference between new hands and practiced ones. The shuttle hesitates. The twine catches. A knot is tightened, then loosened, then tightened again with more care. The older mender does not take over too quickly. She lets the difficulty teach a little, because the hand must feel wrongness before rightness becomes real. After a while, she leans across and shows the angle, not with a lecture, but with one clear motion. That motion is a piece of inheritance. It may last longer than any sentence spoken that day. The learner watches, imitates, and perhaps fails again before finding the way. The room accepts this, because every skilled worker has once been clumsy under someone else's eye. The whole net mender returns to her own task, and the two rhythms continue side by side. One confident, one searching, both part of the same craft. The repaired edge is nearly complete when a gust of wind rattles the window in its frame. No one startles. The sound enters the room and passes through it, like many weather sounds have done before. A loose paper shifts near the ledge. The stove mutters. The net lifts slightly where a current of air reaches it, and then settles back into the mender's lap. Her fingers wait for that settling before making the next knot. This is patience on a very small scale, almost invisible from across the room. She does not fight the lifted mesh. She waits for it to lie properly, then sets the knot where it belongs. The difference may be only a second, but that second contains the whole temperament of the work. You cannot mend well by bullying every inconvenience. Sometimes the material must be allowed to stop moving before the hand can do its part. By noon, the morning's first repair is finished, and the net lies flatter than it did when the day began. She lifts it, gives it a practice shake, and watches the new section move with the older mesh. It behaves well enough. A little stiffness remains where the twine is new, but the sea and the deck will teach it soon. She folds the section aside and reaches for the next, because completion in this room almost always leads to another beginning. The next net has cork floats attached along one edge, and their presence changes the work. They knock softly against the bench, hollow and irregular, bringing another sound into the room. Some are worn, chipped, darkened by handling and sea, and they carry the faint smell of old buoyancy, tar, wet cork, and storage. The mender moves them aside as she works, not impatiently, just clearing the line of repair so the shuttle can travel. Floats make the net feel more like a whole instrument, something designed not merely to hang, but to behave in water. Each part has a duty, even the humble cord that ties one piece to another. The mender knows the floats must sit correctly, the edge must hold, and the mesh below must open as intended. Her repair is therefore not only in the torn square, but in the relation of that square to the floating edge and the sinking pull below. The room smells warmer now because bodies, tea, and the stove have softened the first cold. Damp still lingers near the floor, and if you shift your boots, you may feel the boards give slightly under old moisture. The light is milky and diffuse. Voices come and go. Someone unwraps bread. Someone asks for the knife and receives it handle first, as one does in a place where hands matter. These courtesies are small, but they keep the day orderly. The hull net mender eats without fully leaving the net. Her lunch rests in paper, and the paper darkens where grease or damp touches it. She chews slowly, looking at the next damaged place, perhaps already planning how the afternoon will go. A crumb falls onto her coat, and she brushes it away with the back of her fingers. The gesture is tired and ordinary, and it brings her closer than any portrait could. During the pause, talk turns to a family matter, then to coal, then to a shop where something might be had if one went early enough. The voices are practical, but beneath them runs a shared understanding of strain. Everyone in the room knows shortages, tiredness, and the effort of making do. Yet the talk does not sink into despair. It moves, like work moves from one thing to another, carrying people across the hour. After lunch, the mender returns to the cork-edged net, and the floats begin their soft knocking again. The sound is almost sleepy, a wooden cluck and tap as they touch each other and roll against the bench. She turns the net so the damaged line sits where her hands can reach without twisting her shoulders too harshly. Comfort is not always available, but a worker learns to take what can be arranged. A better angle can save an ache later. The tear here is near a fastening point, and the repair must account for strain from more than one direction. She clears a short length of old twine, checks the neighboring knots, and replaces not only the broken part, but the tired pieces beside it. You can see her refusing the temptation of the smallest possible patch. A larger repair now may prevent a worse one later, and that kind of foresight rarely receives thanks, because its success is the absence of trouble. The shuttle moves differently around the floats, sometimes interrupted, sometimes turned through a tighter path. She uses her fingertips to keep the float line out of the way, then draws the new twine beneath it, snug but not choking. If tied too tightly, it will pull badly. If tied too loosely, it will chafe. She finds the middle pressure again, and the net accepts it, with a small settling movement that only experienced hands might notice. Afternoon light slants across the floorboards, showing the uneven damp marks left by gear and boots. A strand of hair has escaped near the mender's face, and she pushes it back with her wrist because her fingers are not clean. The gesture leaves no drama. It is merely another adjustment in a day made of adjustments. The work continues, and the loose hair will probably fall again before the section is done. We can stay with that human nearness, because forgotten labor is not made only of tools and tasks. It is made of bodies in weather, clothing worn at elbows, tea that cools too quickly, eyes that tire, hands that remember, and the quiet pride of doing something properly even when few people are watching. The hull net mender's day is full of such small human facts. They are not decoration. They are the substance of the life around the craft. Someone brings news from outside, perhaps that a vessel has shifted berth, or that a delivery is late, or that the wind has turned again. The information passes through the room and settles wherever it is useful. The mender absorbs what matters and lets the rest drift by. She has a knot half made, and unfinished knots have their own authority. Until it is set, the wider world can wait at the edge of hearing. The cork-edged repair takes longer than expected, as repairs often do. A hidden weakness appears near one float, and a fastening must be remade. The mender's fingers work around old knots thick with salt and dark treatment, teasing them free enough to accept new line. The old cord resists, then gives. You can almost feel the release through your own hands, that small yielding after steady pressure, and the satisfaction when the new tie lies where the old one failed. She checks each float along the repaired stretch, not simply the place of the tear. They must sit in relation, spaced and held so the edge will ride properly when the net returns to water. One float knocks another. She moves it back. Another tie is tightened. The line begins to look orderly again, not neat in a parlor sense, but prepared for work, which is a more demanding kind of neatness. Late in the afternoon, the room grows quieter because fatigue has thickened the air. People still speak, but less often, and the words come in softer pieces. The stove has settled into embers. The tea has lost its first heat. Outside, the port continues with its own stubborn life, but even its sounds seem cushioned now by the damp evening gathering over the roofs. The mender's hands slow slightly, though the knots remain sound. There is a moment when she lays the repaired cork line across her lap and lets both hands rest on it. It is not a formal pause, and perhaps no one else notices. Her palms lie against rough cord and worn floats, feeling the shape one more time before the section is set aside. Then she lifts it, folds it carefully, and places it with the other completed work. The day has gained another small victory too plain to announce. The remaining heap still looks large, because netting has a way of expanding when one is tired. What seemed manageable in the morning now lies in folds that suggest more labor than the light can hold. She judges what can be done and what should wait. This judgment is merciful as well as practical. To begin a difficult repair now might spoil it, so she chooses a simpler task, one that can be finished before the room closes. It is a short tear near the center of a panel, surrounded by sound mesh, the kind of repair that brings relief because its borders are honest and its path is clear. She draws the net close, sets the gauge, and begins. The shuttle moves through a calmer passage now, away from floats and heavy edges, and the twine runs with fewer interruptions. After the awkward work, this smaller mend feels almost like smoothing a sheet. You can hear the rhythm returning to its gentlest form. Pass, turn, draw, tighten. Pass, turn, draw, tighten. The repeated motion might carry the mind towards sleep if one were not responsible for the knot. For us, listening beside the work, it is enough to let the sound become a kind of lullaby made from practical things. The hull net mender keeps working, and we let our attention rest in the pattern she restores. The short tear closes steadily. Each new mesh joins the next until the gap has lost its ragged personality and become merely a part of the net again. That is what a good repair does. It removes the drama from damage. It returns the object to usefulness and then steps back. The mender trims a loose end, presses a knot flat, and checks the surrounding squares with a final slow pass of her hand. Evening light is nearly gone now, and lamps give the room a warmer colour than the day ever managed. Shadows gather under benches and inside heaps of net, while the higher parts glow softly where the light catches old fibre. The air smells of smoke, damp rope, and the faint stale sweetness of tea leaves. Someone laughs at something small, and the laugh fades quickly, not because it is unwelcome, but because everyone is tired enough to let it go. The tools are put away in an order that has become almost ceremonial through repetition. Shuttle here, knife there, twine protected, gauge placed where it can be found by touch if morning is dim. The mender clears the immediate bench, not perfectly, but respectfully, because tomorrow's self deserves a workable beginning. She brushes away the day's cut ends, and they fall together in a small pale scatter before being swept aside. The net heap waits, less wounded than it was. When she stands, the body speaks in quiet corrections. The back straightens slowly. One shoulder rolls, fingers flex against stiffness. She may press a thumb into the palm of the opposite hand, kneading the place where the twine has passed all day. Then she reaches for her coat, and the coat carries its own smells, damp wool, smoke, outside air, and a faint trace of home that has survived the workroom. The door opens to evening, and colder air enters with the smell of the dock. It is sharper now, washed by the day's rain and thickened by smoke from chimneys and funnels. The hull net mender steps out, leaving behind the bench, the stove, the waiting nets, and the half-warm cups someone forgot to finish. We remain for a moment in the doorway, watching the room hold its after-image of labour. Empty workrooms can feel full when the day has just left them. The harbour outside is not still, but its movements have changed. Men cross in fewer groups. A vehicle passes slowly, wheels hissing through damp, ropes creak where vessels shift against their lines, lamps reflect in puddles and break into trembling pieces when footsteps pass through them. Above the roofs, the sky is a deepening grey, and the river beyond the buildings moves unseen but strongly present, like a thought the city never quite stops thinking. She walks through this evening as one of many people going home, and that is part of why memory loses her. The street does not mark her out. Her coat is practical, her hands are tired, her face is turned against the wind, and she carries the day in ordinary silence. Yet if you could read the traces on her fingers, you would see the harbour's hidden pattern there. Knot after knot, repair after repair, the shape of work no monument has kept. At a corner, she may pass someone coming in for a later duty, and they exchange a word or nod. The city works in overlapping shifts, so one person's ending is another person's beginning. Somewhere a night watchman is preparing his round. Somewhere a cook is lifting a pot. Somewhere a clerk is closing a ledger, and somewhere a vessel is being made ready while most windows begin to glow with evening. The mender belongs to this wide, interlaced quiet. Home receives her without ceremony, as homes often receive the tired. A door closes against the cold. The smell changes from dock to kitchen, from salt and fish to soap, coal, cloth, and whatever can be made for supper. The hands that repaired the net may wash, dry, and then reach for another ordinary task before rest fully arrives. Work seldom ends at one doorway, especially for those whose labour has always been expected to stretch. But perhaps there is a moment near the fire or stove when her hands are finally still. Perhaps she sits with a cup and hears the house around her, someone moving in another room, a chair creaking, a spoon against enamel, rainwater dripping somewhere outside. Her fingers retain the memory of knots twitching faintly in the lap, as if the day's motions have not yet agreed to sleep. Gradually they loosen. The evening gathers her back. We do not need to know exactly what she thought in that moment. it is enough to know she had won. The hull net mender was not only a function in an industry, not only a pair of capable hands at a bench, but a person whose tiredness had texture, whose skill had history, and whose ordinary life extended beyond the gear she repaired. Remembering her gently means allowing that fullness without pretending we can fill every blank. Night settles over the dock again, and the nets wait in their quiet heaps, some mended, some marked, some still torn and patient for morning. The repaired knots hold without applause, they do not glow, they do not call attention to themselves. They simply join old line to new, opening to opening, edge to edge, until the larger pattern can go on doing what it was made to do. That is a restful image, and we can let it remain. In the darkened workroom, the bench cools beneath the last warmth of the day. The window reflects almost nothing. The stove fades to a low red memory, then to ash. The shuttle lies still, but its stillness is not emptiness, because it has carried the day's repeated motion and will carry it again. Outside, the Humber tide turns somewhere beyond sight, patient and broad, while Hull sleeps by degrees around its docks. And in that half-imagined quiet, where river air moves through unseen gaps and the room keeps the smell of damp fibre, the forgotten mender's work continues to rest inside the thing she touched. A knot tied well does not need to be remembered by name to hold. A repair made carefully does not need to be praised to serve. Yet tonight, softly, we have let it be noticed, and the noticing can be as light as breath on cold glass, fading there, then gone,